The galaxy had seen many powerful species. Some were strong, others intelligent, and a few were both. But none had ever seen anything quite like humanity. For centuries, civilizations had existed in the vast reaches of space, and for centuries, the galaxy had believed they were the most advanced. That was, until humanity arrived. It all started when the Galactic Council sent out an invitation. They were facing a problem, one that had baffled them for years. It was something they couldn't fix despite all their technology, knowledge, and expertise. They needed help. And so, they turned to humans who had only recently made contact with the galaxy's other species. The invitation was clear. We seek your assistance. Come to us. We have a problem only you can solve. The message reached Earth and stirred curiosity. No one truly knew what the problem was, but the message was too important to ignore. At first, no one took it seriously. The humans weren't exactly seen as a threat, nor were they considered particularly important in galactic affairs. They had not yet expanded beyond their solar system. They had no real understanding of the complexities of galactic life, and the Council doubted they could do anything. But as the months passed, the pressure on the Galactic Council grew. They were running out of time and needed answers. Answers only humans seemed to be able to provide. So, a delegation of humans, led by Captain James Walker, a decorated space engineer, and a team of brilliant scientists, traveled to the Council's home planet. The ship they traveled on, the Star Chaser, was simple by galactic standards, but it was fast and efficient, much like the humans who had built it. The aliens didn't know it yet, but their arrival would mark the beginning of an unprecedented event. The Council gathered in a massive chamber, filled with the most powerful leaders of the galaxy. Representatives from all the major species were present, some with their arms crossed in skepticism, others whispering among themselves. They had all heard of the humans, their reckless ambition, their strange ways, and their unpredictable nature. They couldn't help but wonder, what could humans possibly bring to the table? Captain Walker and his team entered the chamber, a look of calm determination on their faces. They were not intimidated by the towering alien species that surrounded them, nor by the Council's overwhelming power. For them, this was just another challenge, another puzzle to solve. As they stood before the Council, the room fell into an eerie silence. Walker cleared his throat. "We are here to help. Please, tell us what we're dealing with." The Council leader, a towering alien with multiple eyes, spoke. "Our energy grid, which powers half the galaxy, is failing. It has been deteriorating for centuries, and no matter what we do, it continues to get worse. Entire planets will soon fall into darkness. We've tried everything. We've called upon our greatest scientists and engineers, but nothing works." Walker exchanged a glance with his team. They had heard about this problem. It wasn't just an energy issue, it was a galactic crisis. Without this energy grid, the entire galactic community would collapse. It wasn't just a matter of power, it was a matter of survival. Walker raised an eyebrow. "So, why do you think we can solve this when your best minds couldn't?" The Council leader sighed. "Because of your reputation. You are known for your resilience, your creativity, and your ability to adapt. While we are trapped by tradition and by the limitations of our technology, you seem to think outside the box. Perhaps you can find a solution where we have failed." For the first time, there was a spark of hope in the room. The humans had a reputation in the galaxy, one that both impressed and scared people. Humans had solved problems that other species couldn't even begin to understand. They had overcome adversity where others had given up. Now the galaxy was placing its hopes on them. Captain Walker nodded. "We'll give it a try. We'll need access to the central core of the grid and full autonomy to do what we think is necessary." The Council members exchanged uncertain glances. They were hesitant, but the situation was dire, and they had no choice but to trust the humans. "We'll give you whatever you need," the Council leader said reluctantly. As Walker's team made their way to the central core of the energy grid, They were met by a mix of skepticism and awe. The central core was unlike anything humanity had ever encountered, a vast, glowing structure that pulsed with unimaginable energy. No one had ever been allowed this close, not even the galaxy's most advanced scientists. The stakes were high, and the pressure was building. But the humans weren't intimidated. They quickly got to work, studying the grid, taking readings, and analyzing every aspect of the system. They were calm, confident, and methodical. They had been trained for moments like this. They knew that when they said, "Let me try," the universe would take notice. The aliens watched from a distance, both anxious and curious. Would the humans really be able to fix the galaxy's most dangerous problem? Or would they fail, just like the others before them? As the humans continued their work, the tension in the air grew thick. The Council had placed all its hopes on them, and the fate of the galaxy now rested in their hands. The countdown had begun. If the humans couldn't fix the grid in time, the consequences would be catastrophic. The clock was ticking, and as humanity faced the biggest challenge of their lives, the galaxy held its breath. As the crew of the Star Chaser delved deeper into their analysis of the central energy grid, they began to uncover the extent of the problem. The grid wasn't simply malfunctioning. It was deteriorating at a rate far beyond what any advanced technology could handle. The design was ancient, and the energy it contained was unstable. It was a ticking time bomb. Captain Walker stood with his arms crossed, studying the readings from his team. His mind raced, trying to come up with a plan. The pressure was immense, but he had been in situations like this before. The weight of the galaxy was on his shoulders, and yet, in the face of adversity, he remained calm. "We've got a problem," said one of the engineers, a young human named Sarah. Her voice was steady, but there was a hint of concern in her eyes. "The energy being drawn from the core is too much. If we don't stabilize it soon, the entire system could collapse. There won't be time to fix anything." Walker nodded. He knew that if they didn't act quickly, the consequences would be disastrous. "I know. We need to find a way to redistribute the energy, but the core is designed to only handle a specific amount of output. If we try to force too much energy through it, the entire system will burn out." "We've been studying it for hours," said another team member, Alex. "But we can't seem to find a way to regulate the flow without risking overload. We need a new approach." Walker thought for a moment. His eyes scanned the massive glowing structure in front of him. The grid wasn't just a machine. It was a network, a living organism. The energy it was channeling wasn't simply powering systems. It was the lifeblood of the galaxy itself. "What if we rewire the system?" Walker suggested. "Instead of redistributing energy, what if we give the core a break? We could reroute a portion of it to dormant systems and allow the core to stabilize." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "You're suggesting bypassing the usual power flow entirely." "Exactly," Walker replied. "We can shift the load to systems that are not in use, regions of the grid that are inactive. The power won't be used immediately, but it'll take the pressure off the core. The energy won't overload and will buy enough time to fix the underlying issue." It was a risky plan, but Walker knew that sometimes the best solutions came from thinking outside the box. The Council had tried to solve this problem using conventional methods, but humanity had a history of success in moments like these. When everything seemed impossible, humans always found a way. The engineers began setting up the necessary adjustments, rerouting energy, and carefully monitoring the flow. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even close to ideal. But it was the only solution they had. The crew of the Star Chaser worked tirelessly, coordinating their efforts to implement the plan. While the humans worked, the Council watched anxiously. There were murmurs of doubt among the leaders. Some aliens believed the humans had no idea what they were doing. Others weren't sure if this plan would work at all. After all, this was the most critical part of their entire system. If the humans failed, there would be no way to recover. "Do you think they can really fix it?" one of the Council leaders asked, glancing nervously at the engineers. "I hope so," replied another. "But humans have always been unpredictable. They've shown time and time again that they are capable of extraordinary things. But even so, we're risking everything." Time was running out, and every passing second felt like an eternity. Walker and his team worked with urgency, knowing that their success or failure could mean the difference between the galaxy's survival and its destruction. "We're almost there," Sarah called out, her voice filled with determination. Walker wiped the sweat from his brow, his fingers flying over the controls. "Keep monitoring the readings. If the energy level spikes, we need to be ready to cut the flow." The council members held their breath as the final adjustments were made. The room fell into an unnatural silence, every eye fixed on the screen. It felt as if the entire galaxy was holding its collective breath, waiting for the humans to make or break their future. Then, as the final sequence of commands was entered, the grid began to hum. The lights flickered, then steadied. The energy levels fluctuated slightly, but the core remained stable. For a moment, no one moved. The tension in the room was unbearable. The humans stared at the monitors, their expressions a mix of exhaustion and hope. "Did it work?" one of the council members asked. Walker slowly exhaled, his face breaking into a small smile. "We've stabilized the core. For now, anyway. The pressure on the grid is reduced, and we've gained some time. The core won't explode. The energy levels are under control." The council members exchanged looks of disbelief. They had expected failure. They had doubted the humans from the start. But now, they had proof. Proof that humanity was capable of the impossible. Walker turned to his team, giving them a nod of approval. "Good job, everyone. But we're not done yet. This is just the first step. We need to fix the root cause of the problem before the grid fails again." As the crew of the Star Chaser took a moment to catch their breath, they knew the hardest part was still ahead. They had bought the galaxy some time, but there was still much work to be done. The Council had placed their trust in humanity, and now it was up to Walker and his team to prove they were worthy of that trust. But one thing was certain: the galaxy had underestimated humans, and now they would learn the true meaning of determination, resilience, and innovation. Humanity had shown that when they said, "Let me try," the entire galaxy had better be prepared for what was coming next. With the core stabilized, Captain Walker and his team were far from resting on their laurels. They knew that what had just been achieved was nothing more than a temporary solution. The grid was still aging, and the problems that had caused its instability remained unsolved. The clock was ticking, and every second that passed brought them closer to the inevitable collapse of the entire system. Walker gathered his crew in the command center of the Star Chaser. The room was filled with tension as everyone took their places. They had made it this far, but they knew the hard part was still ahead. The galaxy's fate rested on their shoulders. The engineers had stabilized the core, but the underlying issues still needed to be addressed, and the problem was far more complicated than they had anticipated. "We've bought ourselves some time," Walker said, his voice steady but serious. "But now we need to figure out how to fix the problem for good. We can't keep putting a bandage on a gaping wound. If we don't fix the underlying issue, the core will eventually fail again, and we won't have enough time to act next time." The team nodded in agreement, their expressions a mix of exhaustion and resolve. They had been working nonstop for hours, but there was no time for rest. This was the defining moment. If humanity succeeded, they would cement their place as the galaxy's saviors. If they failed, well, the consequences didn't bear thinking about. The Council was growing impatient. They had been watching the humans closely, their skepticism palpable. Many had written humanity off as a reckless, unpredictable species. To some, the humans were nothing more than a dangerous force of nature, something to be tolerated, but never fully trusted. But now, after seeing the humans stabilize the core, their opinions were shifting. For the first time, They were starting to wonder if humanity might be more than they had bargained for. One of the council members, a seasoned alien diplomat named Varric, stood up to address the room. His alien features, angular and fierce, betrayed no emotion, but his eyes held a hint of uncertainty. "You humans have done what we thought was impossible," Varric began. "You've kept the core from collapsing. But we are still far from solving the problem. We need a permanent solution. We need to know what you intend to do next." Walker looked at Varric and the others who sat in the council. The room was filled with distrust, but there was also something else, something they hadn't seen before: curiosity. "We will solve it," Walker said simply. "But we need your help. The grid is much older than we thought, and there are parts of it that are not in our hands. We need to access the primary control centers, and that's where the council comes in." Varric's brow furrowed. "You want us to trust you with that level of access? The entire system could be at risk." "We don't want to risk anything," Walker responded. "But if we don't act now, you'll have far more to lose than just the grid. The energy flowing through the system is unstable. We don't know how long it will hold." It was a risk, but the council was left with little choice. They had already placed their faith in humanity by allowing them to stabilize the core, and Walker had proven that he was willing to take action. Despite the obvious reservations, the council reluctantly agreed to let the humans take the next steps. As Walker and his team worked alongside the council's best engineers and scientists, something strange began to happen. The more they worked together, the more the aliens realized that humanity's unpredictability wasn't just an advantage. It was the key to their success. Where the aliens had spent centuries perfecting their technology, the humans had a raw, almost instinctual approach to problem solving. They thought on their feet, they took risks, and they had a unique ability to turn impossible situations into triumphs. Captain Walker spent hours huddled with his engineers, devising the most audacious plan they had yet. He knew that this would be their final shot. If they succeeded, they would not only save the galaxy, but prove that humanity was capable of achieving the unthinkable. If they failed, well, Walker couldn't allow himself to think that way. "We'll need to overload the power conduit to force the system into a reboot," Sarah, the lead engineer, said. "It's risky, but it's the only way to kickstart the grid back into stable operation. We'll need a surge of power to temporarily overload the system, but we'll have to time it perfectly. Too much energy, and we'll destroy everything. Too little, and it won't work." Walker's mind raced. This was their last resort, and they couldn't afford to fail. He turned to Sarah, his gaze determined. "Do it." The team worked tirelessly, preparing for the final sequence. The room buzzed with activity as engineers, scientists, and council members all pitched in. But as the hours stretched on, the tension grew. They were no longer just saving a grid. They were saving the entire galaxy. With every passing minute, the pressure mounted. Walker stood at the helm, his focus unwavering. The plan was in motion, and there was no turning back. The energy levels began to spike, and the entire system started to hum in response. "Now," Sarah shouted. She hit the button, sending a massive surge of power through the system. For a moment, everything went silent. Then the lights flickered. The entire grid trembled. The energy coursing through the system surged like a tidal wave, crashing into the dormant sections of the grid and forcing it back into a stable state. The power levels stabilized. The core, once on the verge of collapse, hummed with life. Walker looked at the screens. His heart raced as he saw the results. The system was holding. The grid was stable. For the first time in what felt like forever, the crew and council members let out a collective sigh of relief. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Humanity had done it. Against all odds, they had saved the galaxy. But Walker knew that this was just the beginning. The true test would come later. And when that time came, humanity would be ready. Because when humans said, "Let me try," the galaxy knew that it was about to witness something extraordinary. The hum of the newly stabilized grid echoed through the room, a sound that was once a warning now transformed into a quiet triumph. The core, which had threatened to tear apart the fabric of their universe, was now functioning again, thanks to humanity's audacity and willingness to take risks. But despite the immediate success, the real test was only just beginning. Captain Walker watched the engineers and council members move about the room, their faces painted with a mixture of disbelief and awe. The engineers, who had spent lifetimes perfecting their systems, were now being forced to come to terms with something they had long underestimated: humanity's resourcefulness. In a single, seemingly reckless move, humans had saved the galaxy. Yet, even as the team celebrated the victory, Walker's mind was already elsewhere. The mission wasn't over. He knew better than to assume this was the final hurdle. The grid's stability was only a temporary fix, and he feared the aliens had yet to realize just how much further they had to go. "Don't let your guard down," Walker said to his team, his voice steady but full of warning. "This was just a stopgap. We need to find a permanent solution before the grid fails again. Trust me, this problem isn't done yet." His words seemed to hang in the air, a reminder that their work was far from finished. The engineers had done what they could, but now the real challenge was before them: to uncover the deeper cause of the grid's instability and ensure it would never fail again. Meanwhile, the council members were still processing what had just happened. For centuries, they had seen themselves as the pinnacle of intelligence and technology. But here were humans, imperfect, flawed, unpredictable humans who had accomplished the impossible. It was a bitter pill to swallow. Varric, the alien diplomat who had been the most vocal skeptic of humanity, watched the engineers with a critical eye. He couldn't shake the feeling that the humans had more up their sleeves than they were letting on. They had done more than save the grid. They had proven that they could outthink the galaxy's most sophisticated species. That reality had left him unsettled. "We may have won a battle, but the war is far from over," Varric said, his tone grave as he addressed the council. "These humans have done the unthinkable. If they have the power to solve problems we cannot even begin to understand, then we must proceed with caution. We can no longer afford to underestimate them." His words echoed in the minds of the council members. The idea that humanity could be the galaxy's true saviors, and its most dangerous wild card, was a reality they would now have to contend with. But could they trust humanity to play by their rules? Back in the command center of the Star Chaser, Walker's thoughts were equally conflicted. The success of their mission had earned humanity newfound respect from the aliens, but it had also raised questions. What would the Council demand next? And would the humans' place in the galaxy now be at risk, simply for being too good at what they did? "We've earned their respect," Walker said quietly, his eyes fixed on the console. "But we've also shown them that we can solve their biggest problems. And that's not something the galaxy's powers are going to ignore." It was a sentiment that his team understood all too well. For the first time, humanity had proven they could be a force of change, one that couldn't be easily ignored, even by the most established and powerful civilizations. And yet, no one could say for sure what that meant for their future. As the humans sat in the room, deep in thought about the work ahead, one thing was becoming clear: their actions had altered the course of history. Humanity had never been content to simply survive the galaxy. They had made a name for themselves as wild cards, unpredictable, yet capable of achieving feats no one else thought possible. In every action, they had proven that they were more than just survivors. They were problem solvers, innovators, and fighters. They would not wait for the galaxy to hand them a seat at the table. They would carve their place through sheer willpower and ingenuity. Walker's voice cut through the silence. "I don't know what the next step will be, but we're going to face it head-on. Humanity has proven that we can do the impossible. Now, let's show them what we can really do." The tension in the room deepened as his team nodded in agreement. They had all witnessed the same truth. Humanity's potential was far from being fully realized. They had just scratched the surface of what they could achieve. And as the galaxy watched, Humanity's next move would determine the fate of not just the grid, but of the entire galaxy. The implications were far-reaching. If they succeeded, humanity would be established as the galaxy's ultimate force, one that could never be overlooked again. But failure was not an option. For humanity, there was no turning back now. As the team moved forward, the eyes of the galaxy's most powerful species were upon them. The stakes had been raised higher than ever before. This was no longer about survival. It was about proving that humanity's place in the galaxy was not to be questioned. The challenge had only just begun. The calm that had settled over the command center was shattered by the sudden arrival of a new transmission, a message from the Galactic Council. The screen flickered as it came to life, displaying an image of Varek, the alien diplomat. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes betrayed a certain tension, a flicker of something far deeper. "Captain Walker," Varek's voice crackled through the speakers. "The Council has convened. We've come to a decision. Your people's actions have forced us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about the galaxy. Humanity is no longer just a species on the fringe. You are now a power we must contend with." Walker's heart sank, his hand gripping the edge of the table. He knew the Council's decision was coming, but the weight of it still hit him hard. This wasn't just about technology or survival anymore. This was about control, and whether humanity would be allowed to keep it. "We have decided that humanity must be kept under close observation. Your race's ingenuity is undeniable. But with that power comes a responsibility," Varek continued, his voice steady but tinged with an unspoken threat. "The consequences of your continued involvement in galactic affairs will have repercussions beyond your understanding. Proceed with caution." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Walker stood motionless, his mind racing. The Council was scared. And why wouldn't they be? Humanity had demonstrated a power they hadn't seen before, unpredictable, untamed, and capable of reshaping the very balance of the galaxy. His first instinct was to prepare for the worst. The Council's warning was clear. Humanity had crossed a line, and now the eyes of every powerful species in the galaxy would be fixed upon them. They would be watched, monitored, and controlled, all under the guise of responsibility. "I knew this was coming," said Lieutenant Reyes, the officer standing beside Walker. She didn't look surprised, but her voice was filled with apprehension. "We can't just be allowed to exist without consequences." Walker turned to her, his face grim but resolute. "No, we can't. But that's what makes us different, Reyes. We never back down from a challenge. If the galaxy wants to make us their target, then we'll show them exactly what humanity is capable of." The crew exchanged nervous glances, but Walker's words stirred something deep within them, a sense of unity, of defiance. The Council might think they could control humanity, but they were about to learn just how wrong they were. "We've faced down death and destruction before," Walker continued, "and this will be no different. They think they can hold us back, but what they don't understand is that we thrive in chaos. We grow stronger the more they try to cage us." The room hummed with the energy of his words. It was true. Humanity had faced insurmountable odds before, and each time, they'd emerged victorious. They had fought against impossible enemies, survived hostile worlds, and now they had to fight a new battle, the battle for their place in the galaxy. The decision had been made, and humanity's fate was in the hands of the Council. But Walker knew this battle was far from over. He wasn't about to let them strip away humanity's future. He wasn't about to let the galaxy dictate what his people could or couldn't do. "Prepare for the next phase," Walker said, his voice unwavering. "We're not just going to survive in this galaxy. We're going to change it." The crew nodded, understanding the gravity of what lay ahead. They were no longer fighting for survival alone. They were fighting for something bigger, the future of humanity, and its rightful place among the stars. But as they moved forward, a dark cloud hung over them. They weren't the only ones watching. The galaxy had begun to see humanity as a threat, and the other powerful species were not about to let this new force rise without their own attempts to control it. The Council had already made its move, but who else would follow? Walker knew they had to move quickly. Humanity's potential was limitless, but so was the galaxy's hunger for power. He had no illusions about what was at stake. If they didn't act decisively, the forces aligned against them would tear apart everything they had worked for. "Gather the team," Walker commanded, his tone hardening. "We need to figure out how to turn this to our advantage before it's too late. The galaxy won't give us a chance, but we'll take it anyway." The crew sprang into action, each member knowing the fight ahead would be unlike any they had faced before. The challenge had only begun, and the true consequences of humanity's rise were yet to be fully understood. As the team worked tirelessly, Walker could only think of one thing. Humanity's destiny had changed forever. There was no turning back now. Whether the galaxy was ready for humanity or not, they would never be the same again. And no one, no matter how powerful, would stop them. The night was quiet aboard the flagship, but the crew knew better than to believe that meant peace. The galaxy was shifting, and humanity was now at the center of that transformation. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about positioning themselves in a universe that had never seen anything quite like them. Captain Walker sat in his quarters, reviewing the data from the previous battle, the one that had triggered the Galactic Council's warning. The alien forces they had faced had been strong, no doubt, but not invincible. Every time humanity was pushed to the edge, they fought harder, smarter, and with more determination than anyone could have expected. As the captain stared at the digital maps of the galaxy, a message arrived, urgent, encrypted, and clearly from someone within the council. His heart skipped a beat as he opened the transmission, the glow from the screen lighting up his face. "Captain Walker." The voice was familiar. It was Varric, the alien diplomat who had first warned them of the council's displeasure. "I have news, and I am afraid it is not good." Walker leaned forward, his gaze fixed on the screen. "What is it?" Varric hesitated before continuing. "You are not the only humans in the galaxy, Captain. There are factions, hidden groups of your people, who have already begun to build their own weapons, their own armies. The Council is concerned that if these humans decide to act on their own, it could bring about a war that no one can control." Walker's stomach twisted. He had known that humanity's reputation was growing, but this was something entirely different. It wasn't just the powerful factions of the galaxy watching them. Now it seemed there were humans on the other side too, humans who had aligned themselves with alien forces, perhaps even with hostile motives. "Are you telling me we're dealing with humans who want to destroy us?" Walker asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Varric nodded grimly. "Yes, there are cells that have broken away, forming alliances with enemies of the Council. They believe that humanity's true strength lies in chaos. They are using your rise to power as a means to gain influence, to reshape the galaxy in their image." Walker clenched his fists, feeling the weight of the decision in his hands. He had always believed in the strength of humanity, the unity that could be found in their determination and ingenuity. But what if some of his own people wanted to tear that unity apart? "Are the Council prepared to fight these humans?" Walker asked, his voice betraying none of the panic he was beginning to feel. Varric shook his head. "The Council is caught in a web of their own making. They have been focusing too much on keeping you in check and have neglected the internal threat. I am sending you a list of known factions. You need to act quickly. If you allow this fracture to grow, the war you fear will come to pass." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Walker in a silence that was deafening. The galaxy's eyes were no longer the only ones focused on humanity. There were other humans, shadowy figures, dangerous players, who had taken matters into their own hands. And they weren't looking for peace. They wanted power, and they would stop at nothing to get it. Captain Walker stood up from his chair, his mind racing. The future of humanity was no longer in their own hands. It had become a battle on two fronts, one against the galaxy and one against their own kind. "Lieutenant Reyes, Walker called out as he stormed to the bridge. "We need to rally our forces. The Council won't stop the chaos. It's up to us to keep our people together and show the galaxy that we don't back down. Not to them, and certainly not to ourselves." Reyes turned to face him, her eyes filled with understanding. "Understood, Captain. We'll do whatever it takes to keep humanity from tearing itself apart." Walker nodded grimly. "Get the fleet ready. We have to secure the factions that remain loyal to us. If we can do that, we may be able to stop this before it becomes an all-out war." As they made preparations, Walker couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to spiral completely out of control. The galaxy was no longer just watching humanity. It was preparing to fight against humanity. And now, humanity had to face its own demons before it could face the galaxy. The pieces were in motion, and every move they made would bring them closer to the breaking point. Either they would unite and become a force the galaxy could never ignore, or they would fall, fractured, lost to the chaos of their own making. There was no going back now. The first signs of the impending chaos arrived faster than anyone had expected. The transmission from Varric had barely ended before Walker's crew was thrown into action. The galaxy wasn't just waiting for humanity to fail. It was already reacting to the growing fracture within the ranks. Alien fleets that had once seemed distant were now edging closer, moving with alarming precision toward human colonies. Walker paced the bridge of his ship, his thoughts racing. There were multiple reports of unmarked ships, possibly human, crossing into neutral space. A signal had been detected, but it was scrambled, impossible to decipher with the current technology. It was too perfect. Whoever was behind this knew how to cover their tracks. "We've got incoming," shouted Lieutenant Reyes from her station, her voice tight with urgency. "Unknown ships, but they're human." Walker's stomach clenched. The last thing they needed was a rogue human faction on their tail. "What's their heading?" "They're closing in on our supply lines, Captain," Reyes replied. "They're trying to cut us off from our colonies. It looks like they're setting up an ambush." "Damn it," Walker muttered, slamming a fist onto the armrest of his chair. "Prepare for battle. If they think they can weaken us by cutting off our supply lines, they're gravely mistaken. We need to show them who they're dealing with." Reyes nodded and immediately began issuing commands, activating the fleet's defense systems. Walker turned to his crew, his voice steady despite the storm brewing outside. "This isn't just a fight for survival anymore. This is about maintaining control of humanity's future. If we let these factions tear us apart, then everything we've worked for will be destroyed. We fight to protect what's ours." The tension in the air was palpable as the crew made their final preparations. Walker couldn't shake the feeling that this battle was only the beginning. This wasn't just about winning. It was about sending a message. The galaxy needed to know that humans, no matter how fractured, would not go down without a fight. The attack came swiftly, the enemy ships appearing out of nowhere and launching a barrage of missiles. But the humans aboard the flagship were ready. Shields flared up as the enemy's fire slammed into them, and the crew fought back with ruthless efficiency. The human fleet retaliated, missiles launched with deadly precision. The sky around them lit up with the explosions of impact, the battle raging like a storm across space. Walker stood on the bridge, watching the chaos unfold. He couldn't help but feel a strange sense of pride. Despite the odds, despite the chaos, humanity had found a way to fight back. They had become more than just pawns in someone else's game. They had become the ones pulling the strings. "Captain," Reyes called out, her voice sharp with urgency, "the enemy fleet is retreating. But we're getting reports that their forces are already regrouping." Walker's eyes narrowed. "They'll come back. But this time, we'll be ready." As the last of the enemy ships disappeared into the dark void of space, Walker allowed himself a moment of quiet. The galaxy had seen their power, but this was only the first clash. There were still more battles to come, and if humanity was to survive, they would need to fight not only for their future, but for their unity. The factions within their own species were dangerous, but they could not be allowed to tear them apart. "Get the fleet ready for the next wave," Walker ordered. "We'll hit them before they have a chance to regroup." "This ends now." Reyes nodded, her face set with determination. "Understood, Captain. We'll take the fight to them." Walker turned away from the view of the galaxy, his eyes locked onto the holographic display of their fleet. It was time to show the galaxy what humanity was capable of. The humans may have been fractured, but their resolve was as strong as steel. The question wasn't whether humanity would survive. The real question was how much the galaxy would be willing to sacrifice to stop them.